So, for the ones who watched my last video, I am a bit burnt out of grinding the same gameplay on Godfall for new items like the Dreamstones and the Tower of Trials and whatnot, but I do believe that I have found a fix for that. I will be associating with some players who have different builds and understandings of the game, and I would also like to try to condense and combine our knowledge so I could give you friends the best well of information there can be. So for the pilot of this little project, I actually believe that I could mix well my theory crafting skills with someone who's equally good at that, but also has a lot of proof checking. And he's going to be able to explain a bunch of things to you and clear out some foggy questions that you would have over this game and the reasons why you would like to focus your builds on some mechanics and that. So let's be done with the waiting altogether, and I am going to make room for the first person on my spotlight, and it is going to be Redacted Code with his Silvermane build.
So my name is Redacted Code. Basically, I will be showing you some Godfall builds and trying to help you get better at the game. My build will revolve around solo and group play, so you can do it in any way you feel to play the game. But essentially, this is to help you understand the mechanics of the game and also learn more about what you should be aiming for while you're playing, but not just be stuck by either playing by yourself or in multiplayer. What I'll be going over will allow you to play any way you want to play, and it will be mostly focused around the current meta and the state of the game, which would be crit and weak point. But this type of build can work for any character. As I mentioned, I do use Silvermane. This build particularly revolves around weapon technique a lot. That's where most of your consistent DPS will come from. But Silvermane has specific abilities where he does gain 10% weapon technique charge, shield charge, and polarity. Shield and polarity are not part of this build. We're mainly focused on the weapon technique and the boost in how quick you get weapon technique and how quick you get your Archon Fury. Archon Fury on most builds is not up very often, unless you pick up charges that are on the ground from enemies that you kill. So, with the way this build works and having your weapon technique up quite often, you'll often have your Archon Fury up enough as you're using your weapon technique. So that's kind of where we're gonna play around and have the build mostly focus on that weapon technique, and you'll get the most damage out of it. The current stats that I have at the moment, even though it is not min-maxed, is 3013 might, 2019 spirit, and 2046 vitality. Essentially, what we're aiming for is 40% crit chance, 300% crit hit bonus damage, and 200% weak point damage. I haven't gotten everything to where it needs to be. However, this is about where you're going to end up with just by getting these base items that I currently have, and you can fine tune it from there once you get the better pieces and the better rolls. The point with the crit chance, anything past 40% is not a significant bonus to the damage and how often you'll be critting. So 300 is the sweet spot, and 40 is the sweet spot for chance. Essentially, the amount of damage you lose by having anything past 40 is quite significant in comparison. This is your baseline for all of your characters. So if you decide to play a more weak point based character, like Illumani, then you'll increase your weak point and lower your crit chance instead of lowering your crit damage. So 30% would end up being your baseline crit hit chance instead of 40, and that extra 10% will end up going into your weak point. So the gear that I actually use for Silvermane and most of the characters is Wanderer's Ambition as my dual blades. The one thing I would note is that in order to ensure you get the most damage, both blades have to hit. So if only one of those blades hits for some reason, you are not getting your full damage with the dual blades. That goes the same for any weapon, but it's very dual blade specific. My secondary, which I will end up changing, is the Dark Star Crusher, which everybody refers to as the Time Bubble. As of 5 o'clock, November 24th, Eastern Standard Time, this weapon has been nerfed. What you're seeing on screen is the current status of the nerf. So this used to say 70%, and had a much longer cooldown. It has now been nerfed to 50%. Um, this no longer slows bosses or mini bosses for that matter. So this weapon is better changed out for something like a void sight. My charm is Lion's Talisman. So a lot of this build, because you're going to be critting consistently, you want stuff that benefits off of crit as you make those hits. And if you remember, I said this also revolves around weapon technique. This is another example. So the primary is based around critical hit and gaining technique charge. Then my amulet is Mark of the Duelist. Now, what I will mention is that in order to achieve the stats that I showed you previously, in order to actually get 40%, the only items you can get crit chance on, at least in the current state of the game, is your amulet, the charm, and the weapon. So you cannot get crit chance and damage on your rings. As far as the ring, this is personal preference. Mark of the Glory, like I said, both this and the primary weapon are personal preference, where you do more damage, but you do take more damage. With this build, because you're killing things so quickly and both your Archon Fury and your weapon technique is up constantly, most things are dead before they even hit you back. And because you have your Archon Fury up so often, the benefit is that that is your third health bar, in the sense that you can take damage and not lose your health with Archon Fury up. So the bonus damage that you take both from the ring and the dual blade is not, you don't really notice it. Most things are already dead before then. The other ring that pretty much brings this whole build together, that makes it super effective in a sense, is the Zwei's Embrace. We don't have weak points as strong as Illumani, but you are going to be doing a lot of weak point damage just because of the way the inner focus works and the augments that I have, mainly being surety. So with this ring, you're constantly getting overhealth. And then the last two, which is my banner. This is a level 30 banner, but the only thing that scales based on the level is the primary. So what you're really looking for here is the good secondary rolls, because the primary is not going to go up that much from level 50. So if I did have a level 50 mess of banner roll, it's like 65% crit hit damage instead of 55. It's not enough that I'm willing to sacrifice bad secondaries. So that's something to keep in mind as far as your banner. Look for the secondaries, not the primary, if you can get these types of rolls. And then the best in slot, which is Archon's tier, that's pretty much goes for any character unless you're trying to do something very particularly niche. With the Archon's tier and your life stones, your primary is what matters more than the secondary, than it does for like the banner. And that's because your life stone, you don't really use all that much once you get the hang of the mechanics of the game and you have a build that pretty much 3 to 5 hits anything in the game. This is more of a, I want to take a hit on purpose so I can get the bonus for 10 seconds from the Archon's tier primary. I'll go over my augments. Not all of my augments are currently upgraded. They don't have the desired stats, so in order to save resources, not everything is really upgraded, and I'll replace them over time. What I will start off by saying is that your priority for, as far as survivability and longevity, air resistance and void resistance are pretty much the two biggest ones, and then after that will be physical resistance. Air resistance revolves around the blue bubbles that the Nyax throw, that does the most damage in the tower currently, and then void, as you know, is curse, where you get stuck on the ground and you can't attack. So those two resistances are going to be your biggest ones. Your augments should revolve around resistances. So your blues and your greens should revolve around stuff that's basically for survival. So the first one I would go over is Wolf's Fury. So whenever you parry, you gain overhealth. This one is pretty much a given, since you're going to be parrying later on in the tower and later on difficult enemies. It's better to get a benefit from it than nothing at all. So Wolf's Fury is actually one of the better choices. The next one is Divine Conduit. If you remember, I did say this build revolves around having your Archon Fury up quite often and your weapon technique. So most of the items that you saw revolved around the weapon technique. This is where some of your Archon Fury comes into play. So when you get hit, you gain 50% Archon charge, and then the overhealth from banners is just an extra, because you should be using your banner to go well over the 40% crit chance and well over the crit damage. The build that, or the augment that makes most of this build come together is Surety, which most people know is extremely strong right now. So this is where your weak point damage comes from, and then where the ability to constantly have weak points up, because you get weak points exposed during Northern techniques. That is what's special about the dual blades and Surety. You can't have one without the other. This would not work, because Surety exposing weak points with the Northern technique, since the dual blades Northern technique is an aura, it stays up the longest in the game, so you have the highest potential to have weak points up most of the fight. Primal Energy, most of these will be in overhealth, so this is another overhealth, and then it does have Archon Fury damage. Not a necessity, but it's better than most of the other blues that are available, and overhealth is always good to have. Absorption, this is another situation. So if you remember what I said, that you need Surety and you need dual blades in order for the build to work, this is where you're going to get your constant Archon always being available. You gain 50% Archon charge speed for 10 seconds every time you hit a weak point. So you're constantly having your weapon technique up and your Archon Fury all the time. That is a key piece to the augments in order to have both. And then we have Loyalty, which is very similar. It's more charge speed, but it's also a flat rate of charge. And the reason for that is if you get into a situation where you get knocked down, you're going to start losing charge speed. The only way to make up for that is a flat rate in percentage of Archon charge. What I should make clear is that when you're in Archon, the only thing that can knock you down is an AoE attack, which means you do start losing your Archon charge speed. So this makes up for that if you make a mistake or you get knocked down. Force Barrier, most of the time you're going to be in overhealth 100% and you'll have your Archon Fury. So if for some reason a wave of enemies knocks your Archon Fury out completely and it still goes to your overhealth, you're going to be doing damage no matter what, because you'll be reflecting some of that back. And because your attacks can't be interrupted, that means the only thing that can stop you is AoE attacks, which is usually a boss mechanic and not a mechanic of most of the major enemies. So when you do have to fight, it's just constant R1 and heavy attacks, or I should say light and heavy attacks. Crossfire, most things are going to die in 3 to 5 hits, but if for some reason you're fighting a prolonged fight, whether that be due to more than one boss, you're going to enter Rampage fairly quickly, so you're going to end up taking advantage of Frostfire. It's more one of the benefits of just how this build works. You already have a lot of crit chance, so 33% crit hit damage just makes it even that much better. And this weak point will, can be taken off, but if you're not able to get to 200%, this is pretty much where you're going to want to get the rest of your weak point damage from. And then, of course, since we have constant weapon techniques being up, weapon technique damage is kind of like a go-to. Sacred Flame, this one kind of speaks for itself. You just grant additional might, so you just do more damage. The secondary stats, not the best, but that kind of goes without saying. Get what you can get and then upgrade that later. You want to go for your weapon technique and your Archon damage. Those are what you want on your offensive augments. Your defensive augments need to have resistance. The skills I've actually chosen, we'll start off on this side. I chose weapon techniques. I did only take that to level 4, mostly because we get our weapon techniques back so fast that the level 5, it isn't much of a difference in terms of how quick you're already getting your weapon technique back. Some of the skills I did not level up to level 5 just for certain aspects. So Soul Shatter, as an example. Your Soul Shatter is based off of your might and how much damage you actually do. So I don't necessarily need that 5th option where you're not around enemies that are close together. In most of the fights, enemies are relatively spread out, so that extra buildup you're not really going to benefit from as much unless it's something like the Black Tide and Enforcer, where they're fairly close together. Of course, this is a crit and weapon technique damage build, so crit damage and crit chance are going to be ones that you'll max out. Archon Fury relatively speaks for itself, since we will be getting that quite often. Sundering Slam is another good option. So when you slam the ground, you're getting you get the ability to do a lot more damage, but also the enemies will take more damage. So it's twofold, right? It benefits you in both ways. Enemies essentially get hit even harder, and you're able to do more damage. It's a win-win in both situations. And the cooldown's not that long. Once you finish one round on the tower, it's usually back by then. Resistances pretty much goes hand in hand. This is going to help you with the Nyax who throw those air electric balls that pretty much can one-hit you. With this build, with the overhealth and the resistances, if you choose the ones I mentioned in the augments, you will be able to take quite a bit of hits from those Nyax, even after the patch, since they've lowered that damage just a tad. As far as the weak points, this is very similar to what I mentioned with Soul Shatter. You're not in a situation where enemies are very close together like that. You're killing things so quickly that they're not able to get together, where the benefit from that shockwave happens all that often. Finesse, you really only taking this for the slide, for the evasion. I mean, this is a given, right? So the ability to maneuver better as you fight is something you'll always want to have. Takedown, I'll just discuss this one briefly. For PlayStation 5 currently only, even after the patch, there are situations where you will do a takedown if you have the level 5 that you get stuck in midair and you can't come down. For that particular reason, I only go up to level 3, and that's more than enough for most players. Honestly, that extra damage that you get from takedown is more than enough. All stats is a given. Boosting all of your stats is well worth putting 5 points into, and the same kind of goes for might, since that's where your damage is going to scale from. Rampage goes hand in hand. We did talk about this a little bit earlier, where if you do have those extended fights, Rampage, out of the options that are left here on the screen that I didn't choose, is one of the better options out of the ones that are left. More damage is just more damage and further duration. There's no reason not to take it. As far as recovery, I've left this one last in the aspect that this does work towards your globes that you pick up off of the ground as far as the health recovery. That also accounts for your overhealth that you're gaining from all of the augments that we talked about earlier. This works for any other health that you get in return. So when you take a life stone, that also counts for health recovery. So let's say you didn't have this skill and you only were healing for 500 HP. The health recovery increase would increase how much you get healed. And then Spirit, there's no reason not to take this. More Spirit, it's always better. That does affect your charge speed of your item, or I'm sorry, your weapons, and some damage. Not a lot, but some, and that also does let your banner charge faster. This particular setup is able to work on any build, since we did mention the flat stats that you want to go for, the 40, 300, 200. This pretty much works for everything, unless you're looking to do an ailments build. So I would like to say thank you to Kingdom Shy for the opportunity, and also thank you for everyone who stuck through the video and watched the build. Just to kind of overview and a recap, is the build is available to be used in solo play and in multiplayer. So you will be able to reach those high-end floors. I have gotten to 100 with Silvermane, as this build does work with any character that you see fit that you want to use it on. What I would also mention is that if there's anything that you think I've missed, or you want further information on, or just an idea of how the build plays out, if there's things that you see that could be improved, just feel to leave a comment, and I will try to get back to you and read through the comments and see if there's anything, if there are any questions left for me.
Alright, boys and girls, this was my friend Redacted Code with his Swiss knife build that can be adapted to many different valor plates / gameplay styles. Seeing you made it this far means a lot to me, and I will make sure that we will answer your questions to the best of our capabilities if you have any. So yeah, that was it for today, and until next time, Shy is out.